I think we should be careful. I mean, laziness is a very sort of value-laden term, right? So, you spend less energy and it's bad.
Welcome to ChatRog, the podcast on ethics in artificial intelligence. I'm Roger Steer, the corporate philosopher. Today, I'm joined by Alexandra Konoplyanik, a practical philosopher who works with leaders and organizations on questions of responsibility, judgment, and ethical action in complex business environments. Alex's work challenges a central assumption of the AI age, that better decisions come from better systems, by asking instead, what happens to human agency, moral responsibility, and relational judgment when we hand decisions over to machines? Alex, welcome to ChatRog.
Thank you, Roger, and thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. So let me start by asking me about you. So you described yourself as a practical philosopher working with businesses. How did you get into that? What does it mean in practice? And what ethical questions are leaders bringing to you today?
Well, actually, before becoming a professional philosopher, I was myself working in business environments, investment banking and executive search at a later stage. So sort of the other side of the equation, the situations where the decisions need to be taken, be it to do with high stakes human resources decisions or business decisions. After I went to the other side, got academically qualified as a philosopher and started working in that field. One of the things that I'm doing, I don't only work in business context, but one of the things that I'm doing, I'm applying my practical knowledge of that field and the ability to speak the same language with people who work in that field with the thinking tools and principles that come from philosophy, and help introduce them to those business environments where I do believe they can make a difference. And it can happen in various ways. So it can be a one-to-one sort of conversation where I serve as a kind of philosophical, it can be an advisor, but it can be interlocutor, sort of dialectical partner to help leaders think about their decisions better. I mean, it can be business decisions, can be personal decisions, of course, as well. It can be in situations where teams want to explore concepts or decisions, or where or thinking about certain business practices that they have, and then we can do that. And I'm a kind of philosophical facilitator who brings in the relevant information also from the field of philosophy, but ultimately thinking is with them, and this is about the structuring of thinking first and foremost, and helping identifying hidden assumptions and things like that, sort of patterns in thinking which are not necessarily obvious, especially in the environments where there is a number of fixed mental models and people used to imply them uncritically. So philosophy, I think, can introduce those lots of other different, you can say mental models or tools, which would think a bit out of the box for those environments. These would be the main things. But I also worked as a kind of philosopher informing development of actually algorithmic models and tools for business use, to make sure that the values that go into those tools are the ones that the human authors actually mean, and then help those who are going to be using them. It was specific tools for employee well-being improvement. So to educate the users of those tools, let's say HR professionals, to apply them in a way that the decision about what it is that they actually want to achieve with them is going to be theirs, rather than uncritically using the tool. And I think that would connect us nicely to the topic that you want to talk about.
Indeed, indeed. Before we go into that a bit more, I love the way that you also mentioned that talking just about philosophical consulting in business does also include working with the whole person, because it's very difficult to separate out our personal beliefs and value systems and thinking styles from the way we show up at work. Did you find that? Do you find that?
I would agree so, though such a thing as role morality, of course, exists when people sometimes try to deliberately compartmentalize their professional self from their personal self and think that it's okay. And this is in itself an interesting question, whether it's okay for us to have two separate identities. They may be overlapping, but ultimately are certain decisions or ways of thinking or ethical principles that are applicable in work context may not be such in personal and the other way around. And I think ultimately every person should think for themselves of whether this is the case for them.
Mm.
I don't have a kind of ready-made recommendations for everyone, but it's definitely a question we should critically engage with. Do I want to be the same person in my private life and in my professional life? And what are the implications of that?
Yeah. And I think it's isn't about, do I want to think with the same values? Because we know from psychology that the cognitive overload of trying to think and be someone you're not really, that's not really genuine, is actually quite heavy and makes for inefficiencies in a business sense. Have you found that?
Yeah, so I think it also depends where the values are and this way of being comes from. Because if it's imposed externally onto you, let's say by your working environment or corporate culture, things like that, yeah, what kind of psychology and also my personal experience tell that can have a severe psychological cost to a person when they're constantly trying to fit into something, into this kind of Procrustean bed of the values and cultural practices that don't actually fit them. So that's problematic. However, there can be a more benign situation when the person tries to adapt to different environments and sort of certain values may take higher priority in one or another environment, but that comes from them, from their sense of adaptability, which is not forced on them, but rather the kind of the contextual relevance, and that can be benign. But these would be two very different situations, and of course there would be some gray zones, right, when there is a bit of both going
Of
on.
course.
So it would be
Of
good
course.
to sort of be clear with oneself, first of all, of what's going on.
Exactly, exactly. So, as a philosopher, we think that language is really important because it's the primary way we communicate with others, although we're also aware of subliminal messages through facial expressions, etc. But let's take the word intelligence for a moment. As a philosopher and as a practical philosopher, how do you define intelligence?
So there is the sort of, I would say, broader conceptual use, and there is the specific practical use that is often applied to, let's say, AI. Yeah, we'll come to the latter
Yeah,
in a moment. So I'd say intelligence, at least in principle, yeah, should be a combination of the ability of cognition, processing information, connecting various bits of it, yeah, see what's the links, etc. But very important parts of intelligence is the ability to make judgments. And the judgments would always be informed by values, not just by information. The ability to see the understanding, to see the meaning into what you are doing, and that very often would be contextual. So what's relevant, what's not, and see the implications of one's decisions. So what it leads to, etc. Having this kind of, so this gential aspect of it, right, which has both to do with the judgment, but also with the responsibility of taking those decisions. And I don't think that, when we're talking about intelligence in the sort of proper full sense, we can really separate that fully from the notion of responsibility. So when we're talking about artificial intelligence, yeah, there are lots of essential parts of that package that are missing. So there is a bit of that, yeah, analyzing information, pattern recognition, uh, but there will be quite a few of the aspects of human intelligence that won't apply to that narrower context.
absolutely. Other guests have talked about intelligence being embodied in a physical, living, um, biological system.
Hmm.
And we can certainly see that, for example, in our pets.
Mm-hmm.
So dogs exhibit intelligence. They also appear to exhibit guilt when they do something naughty like
Mm-hmm.
eat your shoes and so on and so
Mm-hmm.
forth. So do you think there's quite a way to go before artificial intelligence actually starts to meet the standards that you've described and that we've talked about?
Mm. Yeah, I'm not sure it ever would be able to meet them. Of course,
Mm,
never say never because sometimes, our imagination may fail us when we think about what's possible in the world. Yeah, so I don't want to be in that hubristic position. But as things stand now, I do not see how what we call artificial intelligence here is able to exercise their own values and make judgment based on that and hold that kind of human-like responsibility for that decision. There is just no agent of responsibility there for which the outcomes of their decisions matter. There's no mattering going on.
Mm.
And intelligence without mattering seems kind of orphaned. And the thing about embodiment, I think that may be to an extent redeemable by providing different sensors. Yeah, because maybe we can call our body as sort of a set of contextual sensors that we have. And some of those can be artificially replicated. But again, interpreting the signals not just as information, but as some sort of like meaningful relational input and giving that sort of subjective experience of what it actually means, lived experience, yeah. Again, will those systems ever have that capacity? I don't know. But at the moment, I would not treat them as agents, as what they would call in philosophy, right? I would not treat them as standalone agents. So
Yeah.
that's why, for example, I prefer thinking of artificial intelligence as augmented thinking or augmented intelligence
Mm.
rather than artificial intelligence, to sort of shift that emphasis from implied kind of agential aspect to it towards a more instrumental tool-like thing, which supports our thinking rather than is a thinking agent in its own right.
Yeah, you've just said something which leads naturally to my next question, which is it's something that supports our thinking. So, in the ways that you've seen it operating best, how are people, humans who are good at judgment, able to work best with, let's say, large language models, which are very good at identifying, sorting huge volumes of data, which our human mind is incapable of doing unless you give us a lifetime to go and find the information we're looking for. So how, both first of all, theoretically and then in practice, how do you see that partnership working at its best?
Maybe I'll start with the kind of practical, narrow thing and then think about the broader metaphor. So, prompting really matters. And I don't mean just using the right keywords to cover all the relevant ground, how the questions are being asked. Because sort of you can have two basically the same LLM, right, working with the same kind of question, and depending how that question is going to be asked, the results are going to be drastically different. And I've seen that in practice.
Mm.
Yeah, if you want just a confirmation of your own thinking and some tools to be persuasive, rhetorically persuasive in what you already think, it can give you that, no problem. If you want to critically examine your own thinking, stress test it, engage with it open-endedly, it can help you do that. But a lot will depend on prompting and questioning. And the ability to question well, and this is something that, for example, philosophy teaches you to do, is essential. Practically outcomes are really different. If I think about the sort of broader analogies, and I think also something applicable to business context, I think it makes sense to think of those systems as a team of advisors, contractors, subordinates. So when we're using that tool, we can delegate parts of our thinking, of our cognition to the experts, basically, those who have access to more detailed information about that specific domain, those who can process more information in a shorter period of time, those who have some sort of like types of expertise that we don't have. And maybe a second or third opinions, because it's good always for us to have somebody who would critically engage with our perspective, even we know something well. Yeah. So if we use those tools as that kind of composite team, but the ultimate sort of leadership position, the managerial responsibility, the accountability for decisions, the sort of decisions about risk and things like that stays with us, I think we're okay. Yeah.
Mm.
So we're not hiding behind the team. We're not saying, they know better, or, my lawyer told me this, therefore that's the answer. Very different situation. So if we apply that kind of thinking even to our practical use of those systems, I think we can sort of start to intuit if we're using it well or not so well.
Makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting when I use Perplexity Pro as
Mhm.
a research and writing assistant, but I have to remember when I'm prompting it to make sure that it's not just blowing smoke. I have to say, I want you to critique this hard.
Mm.
I don't, because they are programmed to be sycophantic, because that's how people lean into them, because they like to be told they're smart and all the rest of it. You've done a great job there, Roger. Oh, you've
Mm.
done a great, wonderful job, Alex, and so on and so forth. So, and that goes right to the heart of philosophy, which is the whole Socratic tradition of it's about the question, You have to
Mm.
get the right questions before you can even hope to find the right answers. How do you see people in business? Are they really picking that up, do you think? Or do they need more guidance and
Well,
support there?
first of all, I don't think that I have enough, I would say, data in front of me to draw some overall conclusions. Yeah, I think we would need better statistical exploration of the
But in
current
your own
practices.
experience,
Yeah, so my experience would be anecdotal. Yeah, I think. Well, I mean, first of all, it's already massive. Yeah, so people are using it to save time, for basically cognitive offloading. Yeah, you mentioned it in the things that you maybe wanted to discuss today, sort of to give themselves some space to do other things. However, the question is what it is that we offload. If we offload just some sort of more routine tasks or desk research or calculations or, sort of scenario generation or things like that, or that's fine. Yeah, and a lot of people do that. Where the risk lies that it seems to be quite tempting for some people to also start offloading part of judgment, especially if they don't have confidence in their own decision-making capabilities. And that is happening too. And I've seen that happening, including in people in leadership position. So uh, offloading judgment, the moment you start doing it, I think you stop being the decision maker in the room and you move into this more kind of performative style of leadership as opposed to genuine one where actually somebody else is sort of taking decision behind the scenes without actually being in a position to take that. Because even if I'm talking to, well, I mean, ChatGPT is my to-go AI at the
hmm
moment. That they never, if you talk to them, well, from what I experienced, it sort of never sort of volunteers to says, okay, this is a decision you should take. Even the model itself has sort of some inbuilt controls against that. But of course, it can suggest scenarios, but that's not the same as taking a decision that that scenario should be followed, or it's not the same as thinking, okay, what it told me is actually true. All the context has been taken into account. That's what really matters for me in this situation. There is nothing else important that should play into this. Yeah. And there's always space to ask those important questions. And if the user stops asking them at the moment it's getting a convenient answer, that's a problem. But that's also happening. So there is a lot of this like kind of thinking hygiene, which matters. And given how quickly it got introduced into practice, I think there are a lot of people out there who were never properly taught or trained how to use it well. We're all learning on the go. And some of us are better equipped because of the other things that we are doing and our sort of general thinking practices in other contexts, yeah, to do it better. But some of us aren't. And I think there is a big sort of educational challenge for us as a society overall and for, professional situations more specifically, so that people can use it well and use it with accountability.
Indeed, indeed. We have seen some AI agents being developed to ask us Socratic questions. So one
Mm.
of our previous guests, Stephen Klein, has developed a system called Alice, based on Alice in Wonderland.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very hard taskmaster because it won't give you the answers. It will say, what do you want to talk about? And you
Mm-hmm.
say, I need to decide whether or not I do this or this or this. And then it will just keep asking you questions in order, almost like the five whys
Mm-hmm.
and so on. So it's
Yeah.
very much built on that Socratic model. And it's hard work to work with it. Do you think there's something around natural laziness, mental laziness in people who are perhaps overloaded in business with 200 or 300 emails a day to answer and so on and so forth, that that tempts them to go down this route of just using it because they just don't have the time to think?
Absolutely. There's a lot of that going on. However, the question is, of course, the important judgment a person might make, what it is that I
Mm.
should be delegating and what it is that I should be keeping for myself. And if the person who is in a decision-making position starts delegating decisions, they're basically no longer what they're supposed to be. So those tools work best if they help us offload the things which are not critical, which can be in human context could have been delegated if there were enough resources available. So it just makes delegation kind of cheaper and more efficient. But the question ultimately is still like what it is that I keep to myself and what it is that I delegate. And that judgment is in the center of it. And it shouldn't be like, the what I'm least comfortable with doing. Yeah. So I should delegate that. No. So it's not like what it is that is the highest stakes and what it is that might take the most time. No, it's about like what's the essence of my job. And that essence should still be with the person. Otherwise, why do we need them in the job at all to start with?
Yeah.
But maybe on that note of sort of specialized artificial intelligence tools or kind of extended thinking tools. Yeah, I've seen also quite a few other examples of that, and it's quite interesting. I'm following that. Yeah, so um, mm, uh, actually, I've seen some tools. One of it is an explicitly dialectic tool of where the dialectic is inbuilt into whatever it is that you want to discuss, be it the meaning of life or I don't know, like ethics of treating hamsters. Yeah, so
Mhm.
you're getting those multiple perspectives by default, just by the virtue of the tool. There is another tool which is now being discussed with us at sort of Philosophy for All. Just people are sort of coming and thinking of maybe we can co-explore doing things with them as a um, sort of to enhance civic debates. So an AI tool that could be sort of analyzing the main themes, the main concepts, the main sort of challenges that emerge from civic debates, and that could be fed back into them. So there are explorations like that. And then there are some tools which sort of represent and personalize specific philosophers or schools of thought to engage
Mm.
in interactions with people. So I'm curious to see what's going to happen there, whether the mainstream sort of general use models will start being able to be more how do you say it's like start having inbuilt controls to make
Yeah.
core thinking more robust, or those more specialized tools will get more pronounced if the people want to avoid that cacophony
Yeah.
of
Abs-
the mainstream models.
Absolutely. You've just made me imagine all of us having a whole team of philosophers, programmed to ask questions from Socrates to Immanuel Kant, Hobbes, Sir Thomas Aquinas, all of these thinkers. Wouldn't that be amazing if that could be synthesized in some way, just as a way of giving us the benefit of that dialectic system?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, to an extent, general models, even ChatGPT can do something like that if you ask it to. Yeah, sort of, can you answer me this question as if you were Plato?
Mm,
And as I said, I've personally seen those specialized prototypes. That would be really cool. I think we'll see more of that coming.
absolutely. Absolutely. In terms of human agency and automation, the balance there is critical, isn't it? So the question there, and you've already touched on it, is in high stakes decision making, particularly healthcare and finance, these systems which affect lives and livelihoods. Do you think people are making better judgments as to where the AI ends and the human takes over as the ultimate system to make that judgment?
Oh yeah, and it seems to be the best practice where automation started happening earlier, like in high stakes system where I don't know, like aviation, some
Yeah.
medical contexts. Yeah, again, financial contexts where people are running models of what certain decisions will lead to, etc. So if we can have that extra tool to analyze data, wonderful. We can take more into account than is humanly possible. We just have, I mean, our embodiment also creates some limitations for our processing abilities, right? So outsourcing that, great. Taking the ultimate decisions, we're nowhere, near a place where we can see anybody replacing human agents in those. Any suggestions that may be made by the system should be humanly overridable. And we can see examples like, I don't know, piloting, for example. Yeah, planes can go on autopilot and very effectively in maybe like 90%, 99% of times. But there will be situations where the technology will fail or not take something important into account. And human actor should be able to override it because there will be something at stake. To be precise, to be fair, they may be the opposite situations as well. So the famous human
Mm,
factor, when a human be driven by, I don't know, like emotions, biases, health problems, whatnot, can make not the best decision and sometimes decisions which lead to tragic outcomes. But what we do have, we're back to that responsibility and accountability that we as humans have. And I think the ultimate trust in our societies, which is vested into that mistakes are being made, there are
mm,
still responsibility and accountability on the other end of it. Uh, if we start going away from that, there will also something important start eroding in the fabric of our societies of what are they built on.
It's interesting. You mentioned something there about our feelings, empathy, and so on, which AI agents cannot have and
Mm.
maybe never will. There's a bit of a trade off there, isn't there, between the fact that we have the ability to see and imagine suffering
Hmm.
in people who could be affected negatively by a decision. But in a curious way, can AI systems be designed without that? Well, they don't have that emotional baggage to some extent, and they can counter our bias. So we may be overwhelmed with emotion when it comes to making a decision. Do you think there's a role there, curiously, for AI to help our human judgment by overcoming bias?
Oh, absolutely. Again, so if AI is serving as an advisor and somebody to test our sometimes intuitive decisions, and not all of human intuitive decisions will be the best decisions, yeah, use that way. Absolutely, especially in contexts where it's not just about one person, things to do with public policy or public safety, where kind of results for large amounts of people also matter. Yeah, and if there is one specific representative case, let's say, or I don't know, if I have a relative who is um, suffering maybe like from kidney failure or something like this, and my choice is to decide as a public policy sort of decision maker, right, whether to spend the same budget on, let's say, availability of dialysis or availability of preventive healthcare measures, yeah. If I have that sort of personal empathy with those specific situations, would that mean that I'm making overall better judgments for all things considered for the greater good, if that's my objective in a public policy situation? And thinking through those sorts of things with AI can help us. However, again, the ultimate values that will inform our decisions should be with us. So maybe
Indeed.
there will be situations where the greater good for the greater number should not be the overruling principle.
One of the things that I've been discussing with business leaders, and I'm really interested in your view on this, is we know that we can have a Zoom call, we can record a meeting, and an AI will record it and then go through the transcript and then summarize it.
Mhm.
One of the things in terms of business ethics, in terms of ethics, is that we're allowed to make a mistake providing we've made the best possible judgment we can. And
Mhm.
we've had a good discussion and argument about it. Do you think there is value in these listening and transcribing AI agents to say, we're making a big decisions about dialysis machines
Mhm.
and all the rest of it, and there's an audit trail as to the decision we made, which and we can hear an AI basically challenges because it knows our biases and so on and so forth. Do you think that that level of transparency would actually help increase trust in the decisions made by human groups at board level, in terms of cabinet level, in terms of government, and so on and so forth? Because we can see their workings, we can
Yeah.
see the argument.
Yeah. No, I certainly think it's potentially a really good use of AI. Of course, maybe rather than sort of rolling it out full scale, we should test it, smaller samples, because again, something always can happen that we just fail to anticipate. Yeah. Especially when it comes to humans, moral systems. Yeah. So definitely worth testing and potentially
Mm,
rolling out. Because of course trust can public institutions can erode for all sorts of reasons which have nothing to do with AI. Yeah, sort of humans have all sorts of like agendas which may not go in line with the one that they're put in a certain position for.
exactly, exactly. I want to talk about accountability and responsibility. We know recently that there are reports going out that Amazon is making 16,000 people redundant to promote AI systems in their business model. And it sounds like a lot of these are in their management structure. So there's a risk there. There's a risk-based decision that's being made. How do you think when organizations like Amazon are making a decision like this, who has ultimate responsibility for those decisions? The developers, the corporate leadership, the board? Where does that responsibility lie? Does it ultimately lie with the board? or is it shared? What's your view on that from an ethical perspective?
I think the main responsibility is still with the decision makers. I actually don't think that the availability of this tool changes anything fundamentally in terms of the structure of responsibility. I think it may makes it more tempting to try to outsource responsibility or hide behind those tools. But it's a psychological thing. So the leadership still has that responsibility. I think the responsibility of the developers is to be transparent about the tool that they're offering and about its
Mm,
capabilities and limitations and how it works, and provide that truthful information, not to overpromise, not to oversell and not to mislead. But
yeah,
ultimately, whether to use that tool or not, how to use it, to which extent, no, responsibility is still with the leadership. Because AI, it's about, we can put it like that. Maybe it's about broadening our thinking, not about narrowing our responsibility. Maybe that could be one way to think about that.
indeed. I just want to return to a moment about the question of getting lazy when it comes to thinking. So, do you think that the rapid uptake of ChatGPT and other large language models in business is actually leading to a weakening of human judgment in the workplace, even though they're saying all the right things? Do you sense that happening in your interactions? Or do you
It
think
might
the
happen.
opposite's happening?
I think it's uneven from what I can see. Again, anecdotally, it seems uneven. It's definitely a temptation, but it also may be temporary because you know, without laziness, we probably wouldn't have had technological progress. So people often
True.
invent things because they want to save energy on something, and but ultimately they find ways to invest this energy elsewhere. And very often we want to save energy on things which we find boring or unrewarding. Yeah. In order to start spending it somewhere else. So I think we should be careful. I mean, laziness is a very sort of value-laden term, right? So, you spend less energy and it's bad. Yeah. So I think we should be a bit more careful to sort of have using this sort of blanket criticism. Yeah. So if people, again, are outsourcing some sort of energy costly, but ultimately quite sort of simplistic operations, or something which sort of doesn't require decisions, just mostly research. That's okay. It's about not outsourcing judgment. And we can continue exercising our judgment effectively even while using those tools. But people, I guess, need to be reminded of that and educated how to use it in those ways. Yeah, there is a risk. So there probably needs to be some sort of governance measures and educational measures introduced in order to make it easier for people to not go down that slippery slope into using it not in the way that would be best. But it's about sort of counterbalancing those risks, those temptations with ways of sort of not having that happen rather than putting the full responsibility maybe on every individual to do a good job by themselves. Again, about sort of use architecture. We talk a lot
Sure.
about choice architecture. So this is a kind of use architecture. And maybe when AI tools are being used specifically for certain business contexts, they can be those inbuilt, how do you say, like prompts or whatever it is.
Sure.
This inbuilt dialectic, this inbuilt pushback at every step, so that they're not being used beyond where it's beneficial.
You're absolutely right to have challenged me on the values laden use of the word lazy. I guess what I really meant was there's a danger in us losing strength in our moral muscles when we're relying too much on AI. How do you see that? Do you see that as a risk?
Totally. No, I think it's a really serious risk that needs to be, we need to be sober, right, in assessing it and not just sort of pretend it's not there. Um, but the way to deal with this, rather than say, okay, we won't use this tool because people might get lazy or might stop exercising their moral muscle, just think of how to put best safeguards in place so that doesn't happen or doesn't happen to any sort of serious extent. That can be governance safeguards, that can be even like technological safeguards with how the tools themselves are built. Obviously, educational safeguards, so people are being taught to do those things before they can fully rely on automated tools, and maybe provided environments where they can regularly practice it without it. So totally. Just thinking about how to do it best. And one maybe analogy to use here is that Plato was really worried that introduction of writing would weaken people's memory muscle, so people will stop thinking well because everything will be written down, and that would be stopping to do the writing. Yeah, not to write, but to learn to use it as a tool to make it more available to a broader range of people. And basically extended mind, extended intelligence is something that we've been using for many, many years for a big part of human history. Right? We've just been the other tools, writing, the printing press, some more rudimentary technology. They've been there for a long time. We're just getting this slightly more advanced tool this time, or maybe a lot more advanced tool this time. But some of the general principles of thinking about that and of the safeguards might still apply, I think.
Indeed. Wonderful. So we got Plato and Socrates name checked so far in this podcast, which is great. As we move towards a close, I'm just wondering if you had woke up in the morning and you've been granted 3 wishes as a practical philosopher when it comes to the ethical deployment of AI, what would those 3 wishes be, do you think, for you?
Now, that's a kind of situation that I need to apply my human judgment, my values,
Yes.
and ideally give
Wonderful.
myself some time to think about it.
Yes.
Because I think important decisions like that shouldn't be taken on a whim.
Well, I tell you what, how about this as a deal? You come up with your quick thinking responses, and then, of course, you can have however long you want to come up with some answers, then maybe come back in a few months' time and update us on that.
So, what would be my immediate? I think some sort of probably one technological, one educational, some inbuilt sort of dialectical tool into those LLM models where people are not just being given one perspective, even if they're asking for it. Like sometimes, for example, ChatGPT at the end of the answer prompts you, oh, would you like me to do this as well? Or would you like me to do that as well? Maybe rather than giving, and those prompts can be really helpful, but giving this extra, oh, by the way, if you want to, there are other ways to think about that. Yeah, maybe in brief, you might want to consider this perspective, that perspective. Do you want to hear more about that? Things like that. That may be quite a good thing of combining of more specialized dialectical AIs and the more general ones. And educationally, of course, I do think that both in children's education, but also in further education for adults who are already in the workplace, it's quite important to be taught how to use AI responsibly and how not to use it. And it's both how to prompt, but also more broadly, just how to think about it. Yeah, the kind of things that we were doing with you today. It is, what it isn't, what do you want it to be, what do you want yourself to be? Because maybe AI is not so much, so the discussion there is not so much about what AI is or is not, yeah? It's about what we are and how the use of AI highlights and emphasizes what we already are, be it our sense of ethics, sense of responsibility, yeah? So maybe that's what it doesn't just augment our thinking, it also really puts us in this spotlight. And if we want to hide, that may be a short-term result. But ultimately, we're going to be exposed in our sort of human weaknesses and vices. But it doesn't have to be. It also, maybe it in itself is kind of part of our sort of civilizational dialectical conversation with ourselves. Dialectical temptations. Oh, shall we do that? No. In order for us to go to the next step and still be worthy of the title of a human being, we need to override that and sort of synthesize a better next civilizational step for ourselves, given that dialectical pushback from the existence and emergence of AI, something like that.
Wonderful. So you've come up with some really interesting insights. I think the core thing here is you reminded us about how important human judgment is and how we need to constantly be aware of the strengths of AIs in certain thinking models, but they don't have the ability to sense the world as we do. They don't have context, and so on. So I think that's really helpful to our listeners. I love your challenge around offloading drudgery is actually okay. The problem comes when we outsource judgment to an AI model, because the decision making is no longer in the room. And also you're reminded that without laziness, we probably wouldn't have made any technological progress, from the invention or the taming of fire all the way through to the bicycle. So thanks for that. Alex, thank you so much for joining us on ChatRog. You've given us some really,
Pleasure.
well, you are our first philosopher on here who,
Hopefully not the last.
no, hopefully not the last. You and I both know someone else who we're trying to persuade
Yeah,
to follow you.
that will help.
You've challenged us to think beyond efficiency and optimization and to pay closer attention to judgment, responsibility, and the human relationships that ethical business depends on. Thank you for such a thoughtful and grounding discussion.
Thank you, Roger.
If you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, and leave us a 5-star review. It really helps others discover the show. And please look up Alexandra Konoplyanik. She's a super philosopher. She really makes me think, and I'm a philosopher. And she's a super advisor to many business leaders and people outside of the workplace too. I'm Roger Steer. Join us next time on ChatRog, where we ask not just what artificial intelligence can do, but what it ought to do.